people who go out and solicit and receive academic book proposals. And if that's something you've ever thought about doing or something that you have on your radar for down the line, that's what we're here to talk about today. So not only does this get me off the hook, but I like doing this to my guests because we all tell our own stories differently every day. I'd love to hear who you are as a panelist, who you represent in this room, and how you found your way into the wild world that is academic publishing. So Tom, would you mind starting with a little intro?
Yeah, thanks, Steph. I am Tom Hermans Webster. I'm acquiring editor for academic theology and ethics at Orbis Books in Maryknoll, New York. I have a PhD in constructive theology and ethics from Boston University School of Theology. So one of my connections to this is that I am a BTI alum, and am very thankful for the networking and the benefits that the BTI brought to my graduate education. I found myself in publishing on accident. I was on a faculty teaching in one of my subject areas, and it was not the best place for me and my family at the time, and I needed to look for other jobs. And as we know, the academic job market is, the most fertile place in the world, and you can find opportunities all day long. And while I was looking, Orbis had an opening for acquiring editor. I had no idea what that meant. I just knew that I knew what good academic theological writing looked like, read like, and I had experience in editing from years of grading student papers. And so I applied, and thankfully Orbis both took a chance on me and the publishing industry. There are a lot of pieces of it that you learn as you go because of how unique each house is. So that's who I am. That's how I got to my position, and kind of what I'm bringing to the panel.
Thanks, Tom. Emily, would you mind telling us a bit about who you are?
Hi, my name is Emily King. I'm the senior editor for religion, theology, and philosophy at the University of Notre Dame Press. Like Tom, and most publishing professionals, I got into this job on accident, although my accident was long enough ago that it seems like a very intentional, well-built career path at this point. I first started in academic publishing 14 years ago at Baylor University Press. I did both my undergraduate and my PhD at Baylor, so I was there as a student and there learning the ropes of publishing for a long time. Then I worked at Fortress Press for several years, as well as their sister trade imprint, Broadleaf Books, and now I've been with Notre Dame for about just over 2 years, and I'm thrilled to represent them and talk to y'all about publishing today.
Thanks, Emily. John.
Yeah, I'm John Garza from Fordham University Press. I'm an acquisitions editor there, and I kind of, again, by accident as well, ended up, I did my PhD at Fordham in theology, specialized in Hebrew Bible, but I needed, something to kind of, I had a new daughter and needed something to kind of help pay for daycare with that. And then also was like, I mean, it was about 2013. It was kind of the time when alt-ac was kind of all the rage, and maybe it still is a little bit, but so I was kind of thinking in that direction. Had a friend who was working at the press and said, "Hey, we just lost an editorial assistant. Would you like to come try it out?" And that was 10 years ago, and here I am today. So it's one of those things, like you kind of have to follow the path that's kind of set before you, I feel like, with these sorts of things, and it's been productive. I think it sounds like it's been for Emily and for Tom as well. So it's kind of we have our plans, and then things happen differently, and usually that's okay. But I'm excited to be here with y'all and talking about publishing as well.
Thanks, guys. Yeah, so unintentional question about vocational discernment. Love it. Um, I'm Jesuit educated, so like, yes, let's talk about our paths. But I think one thing to get into the nitty-gritty of what we're up to today here on this call is something that can feel incredibly like nerve-wracking, I want to say, as a doctoral student, is this mystical idea of publishing where you're like, but where and when and how much and how little, and do I hold things or do I not? And because it's, I honestly believe this, an art rather than a science, there's no perfect handbook for this, but something that I think could start us our conversation is to discuss when you guys think it is appropriate to start forming that book proposal, right? You all are in book houses, you're thinking about what makes a good book, who's ready to write a book, all those types of questions. So when someone's early career, right, they're an emerging scholar, they're in the latter half or even the last year of their doctoral training or their very first job, where are your opinions about when that proposal feels like it should come across one of your desks? And we can just, there's only 4 of us, so just feel free to unmute and start chatting.
So I guess I would unmute first, so I'll go first. Okay. I would say there are 2 important pieces to that question. One of the pieces is, when is it good for you? Do you have a job you're starting? Are you still applying? Are you really stressed and burnt out on writing? Are you in a place where you need to have a book by a certain time, so you've got to get started? Are you in a place where you don't have time to devote to a project because you're teaching a 5-5 or something insane like that? I think you've got to think about that part of the question first. Are you ready? When do you need a book by? And do you actually have time to devote to doing the huge work of revising your dissertation into a book? Do you have time to deal with peer review? All of that. That's a question, of course, only each individual can answer for themselves. I think in terms of, as a publisher, especially thinking about first books, which are almost exclusively stemming from a dissertation, I think part of that depends on what publishing house you're going to. Some publishing houses will publish dissertations almost as they are written and defended. So I think in all cases, you're going to want to have defended your dissertation before you start approaching a publisher. But some publishing houses are going to require a lot less revision and work, and some are going to require a lot more. So I think it's important to think about, where do you want to publish? Probably the best way to do that is to think about who has published books like yours, or books that you feel proud of, or books that you feel like stand out in your field, or books that are important in your field. And whoever published those, or whatever list of publishers published those, are probably really great publishers for you to approach. And then also to think about, how do you want the project to serve you? Are you just trying to get one and done, get a CV line, get on your way? Or does this project have roots that you really want to turn into something a lot bigger? And then you're going to want to research the particular publishing houses you're interested in and see what you can suss out, both from their website. A lot of times publishers will talk about dissertations and at what point they're willing to consider them on their website, or from perhaps colleagues or friends, and try to suss out, is this a publishing house that's going to have me want to do a whole scale revision? They're going to want to know, what have I revised, or what are my plans for revision, or how have I fully reworked this from dissertation to a book? Or is this a publishing house that is going to require a lot less revision on that part? And then you can use that to guide, I should go ahead and approach someone, or I should not. For me personally, and I would say this has been true of me at all 3 publishing houses where I've worked, I really, really like to start talking to people early on, because I like being involved in that shaping process. I like being, especially when something, either a project is in its nascent form as a dissertation, it's going to become something else, or scholars got an idea and they haven't quite shaped out the book yet. I like to be in on the fun part of shaping that out and getting in the nitty gritty with the ideas, instead of just getting the fully finished thing at the end. Um, so I would say for me, the right answer would be, after you've defended, you've had a second to catch your breath, you've had a second to think about, what do you really like about your dissertation? What do you not? What would you want to change? Then I would want someone to approach me and say, hey, this is my dissertation. This is the idea and the basic argument. I know it's going to take a lot of work to revise it, and I wanted to go ahead and see, is this kind of a topic or a subject area your publishing house is interested in? And if so, what kind of revisions or what kind of changes you want to see? Let's start having that conversation early, instead of approaching me with like a full-fledged already revised manuscript or full-fledged already revised proposal. I'm interested to hear what John and Tom think about when they want to have someone approach them. But I will say that it is almost universal, though, that someone's going to want to know, what have you changed, or what are you planning to change? And have that self-awareness that there's going to be some changes happening. Like I said, some publishing houses have more minimal changes and some have bigger, so that can depend a little bit. But an awareness that your dissertation as is not word perfect and ready to go to production to get turned into a book is a really good thing to have.
That's good. I would kind of echo, Emily, what you said about, like, when you are ready, right? When you feel like you've kind of had the distance to be able to sort of, because those, I mean, the last month, Lear, but like the last month of just the PhD, right, is hectic and time consuming and disorienting in so many different ways, right? And the pressure, of course, is there to sort of immediately think, okay, now I have to see, who am I going to publish this with, all that kind of stuff. Um, take time, right? 3, 6 months, right? Recover, grieve, and then start to vision a little bit for like what you want the rest to look like. And then uh, you know, if you wanted to try sort of an informal way, you could think about, well, who do I know that's published a book, and have they published a book with a publisher that I think my book would fit in with, right? And if that's the case, then certainly that person has an editor, right? And they could always send an email introducing you to the editor. Even if you don't have anything ready, at least you can say, hey, this is kind of what I'm working on. I may have a proposal ready by AAR or CTSA or CTS or some sort of conference. Will you be there? Can we get in touch? Can we meet then? Right. And that kind of clues us into like, hey, that there's this person who I'm in touch with, and they have this idea and it looks really interesting and I want to know more about it. And then you can kind of begin to well, at least for myself as an editor, I can kind of begin to plan in my head, right? Okay, I want to have this conversation with this person, right? And so then I have, sort of in my own um, taskmaster or whatever, right? I know, like, I want to contact such and such, when I'm going to CTA or CTSA or AAR, and that's kind of how that works on that end. But if you're thinking about it, and if you're at the point where you're ready to kind of give it a go, right? Then start. I think informal conversations are really, really nice and really easy and low stakes, right? And for me, I think what it helps do is take away the kind of the barrier, sort of the mental barrier to talking to an editor. We're just people too, right? All three of us here have PhDs. We went through the entire process. Like, we know what it's like, and our job is to help you write publish your book, and we want to do that, right? And if maybe it's not a fit with us, but we know other editors, and we'll send them, send you to them, right? Or so it's always just kind of yeah, feel it out, and then go from there, and don't be afraid to reach out. That's the biggest thing, I think, because that yeah. Tom, what do you think?
Yeah, I really appreciate the two of you bringing your perspectives from the academic university press. One of the big differences with Orbis is, since we're not a university press, we're often not where you should look to take your dissertation. We're often book number 2, or in some scholars' cases, book number 8. And so I think there's a lot of value both in what Emily and John have shared with thinking from dissertation into your first book that carries through your whole publishing career. Get to know us as people, us being editors, and houses. Get a sense of what our trajectories are. I like to tell people, find 5 years worth of catalogs and see what our arc is in the conversation you think you're a part of. Because a catalog gives you a great idea of what we thought was important 2 or 3 years before that catalog came out. So it gives you an idea of where you fit, because you can kind of trace this trajectory of your own work. I agree completely with the distance. At Orbis, that's even more important because we don't often do dissertations straight to first book kind of books. It's that personal discernment of who's your audience, what audience are you bringing to the house, what audience does the house already have that you're a part of or connected to, and then what's your own capacity to evaluate your own work. Those are all super important personal discernment questions for us. We oftentimes, as an acquiring editor here, I'm trying to take meetings with authors and establish relationships with scholars in the field, and recruit them into the house. So if someone sends me, like if John has an author who's working on a book that doesn't seem the right fit with the university press model, and he's like, hey, go check out Orbis. That's a great connection that I love to have. And likewise, if I meet with an author because I think their work is super interesting, hey, we come to AAR, CTS, CTSA, we sit in the back of sessions, we hear your papers. If I listen to it and I think it's super interesting, But I don't think it fit at Orbis. I might send you on to Emily or John and say, hey, this sounds great. Check it out at the university press level. Those connections are super important for us to. And then I just would want to reiterate, I think when you send in a proposal, you're not just thinking about how great your idea is. You're also thinking about who's actually going to read it and who's actually going to listen. Who are you actually writing for? If you're in the classroom and if you want your text to be read in classrooms, you need to be willing to teach your own book. I don't know why you would write a book that you then aren't willing to teach, and why you would think like 20 or 30 other classrooms would be willing to teach it. So dive into your own audience, dive into your students, really solicit that engagement, because that can make a really strong proposal. And be honest when you come to a publishing house. If you want to talk to the guild and just to the guild, then aim at university presses who cultivate fantastic relationships in the guild. If you want to write for congregations and people in the pews, then aim at denominational based presses who have great relationships with congregational resources. Those kind of audience level questions, I think, are vital.
I love that. And you guys answered, I think, one of the questions that was the most opaque to me as a graduate student was whether or not I could email you. Right? Because it feels daunting, because oftentimes and of course you've all said this, and I know this to be true, you are humans, you enjoy coffee, like or tea. But there is, a way that you can break down that barrier quite easily. But I also think that we are coded into a reality where we don't want to waste your time. And we don't want you to remember us as a hunky little grad student who came and bothered you, so I think to hear a reiteration of the fact that, at least it seems for the three of you would rather hear about an emerging scholar and understand where they think they're going and get to know them earlier on in the process, rather than get a 300-page tome slapped in your email inbox without any sort of co-discernment about what that could look like for your press. So I think that's really helpful, and that transitions us right into the next stage. So we've talked a little bit about timing, and then let's dive deeper into the strategy question, because I think that Tom's point about the press's goals, right, trying to discern that through the catalogs, Emily's point about looking at the authors lists and looking at, guidance that the press itself puts out in some of their channels is a great resource. But how do you think about it is, it's not huge, but it's a relatively large field that publishes religion, philosophy, and theology. How do you weigh the strengths of each house with your own work? And then how do you strategize then the components that you all have different requirements for the formal book proposal? Some people require a full manuscript for the formal proposal. Other people, chapter outline and a writing sample. So how do you, first and foremost, weigh the strengths of these varieties of houses with yourself, adding on to what has already been said? And second, the brass tacks. How do I decide, even if I'm working with multiple houses trying to weigh out putting in proposals, how do I weigh those different requirements in putting my package together?
I'll hop in first on this one because I want to develop something that Emily said. Why do you need to publish? I think is the first piece of the strategy question. If you are let's say you get one of those super abundant tenure track jobs straight out of your PhD program, and you have to have a book contract for a double peer-reviewed university press text within 3 years of your hire in order to stay on your track, then you don't need to talk to me. It's that simple. I would love to get to know you and meet you, and I'll come listen to your fantastic ideas, and I'll probably buy your book. But those kind of like, why do you need it? As the writer, those can answer some of these questions pretty quickly. There are some schools that the way they structure the publication requirements for tenure are changing. So pay attention to that. Some schools are extremely strict in what they expect. And so I think that's the first question to ask. Once you then have identified that, and have identified kind of what houses still stand, then I think a huge piece is to look at those audience connections and to look at who you really want to talk to. That's easier said than done in a lot of cases because audiences are kind of nebulous, but you can look at who's informed your own work. Like, go through your bibliography. And if you have a ton of Fordham University Press books in your bibliography, that's probably a good indicator of one of the people you should be talking to. And see what kind of place you could have in a conversation that has been ongoing. I think of one of, and then the last thing, I think of one of my professors in grad school who I think published like everything he did for a 30-year span with SUNY, State University of New York Press. If I was not one of his graduate students, but if I was one of his graduate students, I would aim there first. So that the point there is also then talk to your mentors. Where has your advisor published? Who in the immediately shaping your work? Where are they already connected? And kind of what do they have to go with? Because this is not actually some cutthroat, bloodthirsty competition out here. We're an ecosystem. Theological education depends on us. We depend on theological education, and we depend on each other too in the publishing industry. So lean into those connections.
I wanted to clear up another myth that I think sometimes is scary for people first starting out, which is that can you or can you not talk to more than one publishing house at the same time? Especially when you are first approaching publishers with your book idea. Yes, you can and you should. You can and you absolutely should. And if you get to a point with a publishing house where they are need you to be exclusive, only talking to them or only considering things from them for the time being, your editor will tell you. It's not like some big mystery where you're going to put a foot wrong and they're going to say, "Oh, you messed up secret protocol you didn't know about. You're dead to me now." That's not how it's going to work. So you get now. I wouldn't like make it. Of course, like in your mind, you're gonna be like, "These are the 5 publishers I'm talking to," and you're gonna know like, "I like this one the best," or "I'm hoping for this one the least." Just don't make that obvious, I would say. I mean, it sounds funny, but sometimes I've had in the past someone say, "Oh, thanks for being willing to meet with me. I want to see if X Press is willing to meet first, and then I'll get back to you." That's kind of rude because that says you're my backup option. I can be your backup option. Just don't tell me. And then if you get to a point where you're going to take an offer from John and said, "Great, congratulations. Tell me I've accepted an offer from Fordham." I'll say, "Congrats, go on your way." You just don't have to tell me until you have to tell me, right? But I think that's kind of scares people sometimes. So you can always talk to more than one press at once. Until your editor says, "Hey, we're going to do peer review and I need you to be exclusive for peer review," or "Hey, I'm ready to offer you a contract. Are you going to sign it or are you not?" But you'll know it's not going to be a secret. It's going to be very, very obvious when you should only be talking to one press. I think in addition to the great question Tom raised of why do you need it, I would think about when do you need it? So in addition to the super fun game where we all have slightly different requirements for proposals, we all have slightly different publishing timelines, which I'm sure is incredibly frustrating as an author. But the good news is all this kind of thing will either be on a press's website or you can ask the editor you're talking to, and that those are questions they expect to get, like, what do you need for a proposal? How long does your peer review process take? Do you have an editorial board? How often does it meet? Once a book is under contract and the final manuscript is turned in, how long is it from that point to when the published book is actually out? Those are all things you're going to want to know, especially if you've got like a tenure clock ticking down, and they're perfectly good and fine questions to ask, and you can ask them early on in the process. So that if someone says, "Oh, we can turn it around in turn a final manuscript around in 9 months," or, "Oh, our list is already planned out for 2 years," that might be really relevant to you depending on when you need your book by, when you're planning to revise your manuscript by, how much time you think you're going to need to take. I would also say, in addition to thinking about if you need a university press or not, thinking about audiences or not, might want to think about like the size of the publishing house and things that you've heard. So if you have a lot of mentors or professors or friends who've had really great experiences with a certain editor, or maybe had certain frustrations at a certain publishing house, that's important information to take on. You don't have to do what everybody else is doing or follow groupthink or anything like that, but it's good to be aware of that, to ask people, hey, I'm thinking of sending my book over to Notre Dame. Did you or did you not have a good experience? And there's something frustrating about it. What was it? That's important stuff to know when you're thinking about reaching out to a publishing house. I mean, in terms of size, I think it's not always true, but most of the time it is true that when publishing house is really big, you're going to get less individual attention from an editor or from a marketing department or from a production department than you are if a publishing house is small. That doesn't mean you can't have a great experience with a huge publishing house, but it's something to think about. You can also think, so like, for example, Oxford University Press, really great publishing house, extremely prestigious, great thing to have on your CV. You are probably going to get a lot less individual attention there than you would at a much smaller publishing house. So those are just different things to balance out. How much individual attention do you want from an editor? Do you want to be able to talk to the marketing department yourself, or only kind of be going through an big, much larger ecosystem? Things like that, which may be more or less important to you depending on your career goals and your goal for your book. And in terms of dealing with all those little pieces of the proposal once you're ready to send them off and how you balance the different components with different publishers, the good news is that while everybody wants something slightly different at a slightly different time, they're all things you're going to have to do at some point, because you're going to have a book proposal and you're going to have a manuscript. It's just a matter of when you send which piece to different presses. So once you've narrowed down your list of like 5 or so presses you're interested in, I would look at the website, approach those editors with your ideas, and really see what you can figure out from that editor about what kind of timeline they're working with and what they would expect. And then you can go from there depending on how those conversations go.
That's good. And I like talking last because I get to jump off of what Tom and Emily are saying. So it gives me all the content. So this is good. But to Emily's point about like speaking to multiple presses at once, that actually can work really, really well in your benefit, because it can create competition, right? It can, and maybe that's a dirty little trade secret, but or maybe not. I don't know, but like, so obviously you don't want to just tell me, oh yeah, I'm talking to like all the presses, right? But if you're specific about the presses, and I know, well, I mean, I would like to publish your book and I don't want, Notre Dame to get it, or I don't want Orbis to get it, or wherever, right? Then I have, sort of some things I can do to maybe accelerate the process in some sort of way, like an advanced contract or things like that. So speaking with multiple presses, always above board, right? And always with integrity, right? Because, we try to do that with you as well, is definitely something you should do. And the other thing, to jump off of Tom's point about looking at like your bibliography, you are already experts in university presses and publishing houses. You just don't pay attention to the information that's in those parentheses in your bibliography, right? Like that's just stuff you have to put in. But you know all those things, right? And you know the books that you love, and you know the books that have been influential for your own work. And you also, and the presses where those come from. And you also know like books and presses that seem kind of like maybe like more experimental or more like what you're working on, or something like that. And so you can kind of think, well, maybe I would like to go for that press, even if like it's not, maybe a super popular press or something, because you want your work to kind of to fit in with what they're doing. So you already know this. It's just you need to sort of rethink about how you harness that information, which you already kind of all have as the data. In terms of like the brass tacks, I found this book to be really helpful, and this may not be a new thing, but the book proposal book. This is like, if you want to create like a platonic form of a book proposal, right? This would be it, right? And you could use this to create that form, and then as you're looking at Notre Dame University Press, as you're looking at Fordham, or you're looking at wherever, right? You can kind of pull from that platonic form and create, an individual proposal document for each press that you want to sort of reach out to and talk to. And then you kind of have all of those pieces ready to go, and you are not sort of reinventing the wheel every time. So I definitely recommend this. It's by Laura Portwood Stacer. Stephanie can probably send along more information about that if you're curious, but always nice to plug that book. So.
Plug away. No, I really appreciate that. There's also one, the From Dissertation to Book, who's literally, it's over here. That's why I'm looking at it. I always look over here and my students are like, what are you looking at? I'm like, more books. These are my books I have at hand. William Germano. This was a Jessica Koblenz recommendation, if you know her. But it has been quite helpful for me as well, because my book came out last week. And my first book, and it was a very hacked version of my dissertation. Tom is my editor, full disclosure. That's how I got him here today. No. And bribes, many bribes. But I think that this is a great segue, right? Because both of those tools, right, are just that. They're tools. And they can help you with, and they have helped me, right, with that platonic form. Like, how do I even do this? Much like a dissertation, it is a form. It is a form of writing. It is I used to be a grant writer back in the day, right? It's a way of writing. When you are going through proposals, when you are slogging through your email inbox, what are some of the things that make you excited about the content of a proposal? Because the BTI is incredibly diverse and incredibly wide-ranging in its topic areas. And I know your presses are as well. You can get a biblical scholar, and then you can get like humanist chaplaincy, or you can get the philosophy of Thomas Aquinas on May 4th, whatever year he died. I don't remember. Don't tell Jim Keenan. But like, I think that can be daunting when you're thinking about it, because you're like, I know these people might not care about what I care about. They might not know what I know. How do you discern in a book proposal, in the content that someone sends you, that you're going to be excited about that opportunity to work with them, that you will have multiple meetings to just chat through the process? What makes you pick that one out of the pile, right? What are some of the things? We talked about audience a little bit. We've talked about your authorial motivation a little bit, but you, when you're sitting at your job every day, what are some of those content things that make you say, okay, this one is worth my time. This is worth my effort?
I think for me, well, there's some obvious things, right? Like, does this book, when I skim this proposal, can I tell that it somewhat fits with things that my press would publish, right? Like this is a far more extreme example than anybody I think on this call would send, but I get proposals like for novels in my inbox. Well, we don't publish novels, right? So that's a very easy, like from the subject line, that's a no. There's obviously a lot more nuance to it. That's an extreme example. But like we don't publish science. So if somebody sent me like, here's a physics textbook, that would be a no. So there's obviously a lot more nuance to it when you get into the actual fields of religion and theology. But that's one. Like if I skim this, can I tell this would be an appropriate fit? But I think by far the biggest and most important thing for me is in the email that someone sends when they accompany their book proposal, can they or did they, in like 2 to 3 sentences or in a short paragraph, distill their ideas in a meaningful way? Can they take all of their expertise and put it in a couple of sentences where I, who am no editor, is ever going to be an expert in the subject matter of all the books they publish, to where I, who may or may not know the details of what they're talking about, can I tell, one, this is an idea they are an expert enough in that they can distill it in something simpler, and two, can they convey that in a meaningful way that tells me this is significant? Can that happen? Or is the email 2 or 3 paragraphs of dissertation speak, or kind of like a throat clearing? Can they, in an authoritative, meaningful way, tell me in a couple sentences what their argument is and why it matters? Like, you can use big words, go crazy, name drop the important philosopher. If you're right on Aquinas, name drop him all day long. Go for it. Like, we're a university press. I know you're an expert and I want to hear that expertise from you, but can you do it in a meaningful, significant, and concise way? If you can, I'm going to open up. I'll read your 20-page proposal. I'm going to keep reading. I'm going to talk to you. If you can't do that from the outset, that's probably that may or may not be a great sign of your ability to speak to an audience through your book. And it'll make it harder for me to want to be willing to like take that deep dive and spend all that time and continue.
Tom's playing chicken with me.
Because
I've
got a proposal for Fordham pending.
I mean, I think Emily kind of said it perfectly. I think the other thing too is like, again, if you can, because the process is so difficult, right? Or it seems like it's so difficult to sort of just reach out to somebody, right? You might also be inclined to sort of try and put on a specific tone or specific say things in a certain kind of way that make you seem maybe more scholarly or erudite. Like I just want to, like I just want to read kind of I want to hear from you, right? I want to hear your voice coming through because if I can kind of hear your voice coming through just in the sort of the tone of the email, then I can also sort of assume and also then begin to see that your voice is coming through in the work that you're putting out, right? Which is in that movement from dissertation to book is exactly what we want to see. So yeah, there's not much to add other than that, except for like, I mean, I think Emily, Tom, and I all kind of have authors in mind that we would want to work with, both, sort of like dream authors that we want to work with, but then up and coming scholars that we know through the grapevine that we hear from our current authors. And so if we see a name like that come through, right, or if we see someone reach out to us because of that's really exciting. And so that's sort of again kind of the importance of the informal aspect of it, introducing yourself to us at conferences or brief email introductions beforehand before the proposal stage is even kind of there.
Yeah, thank you for bringing us back to that informal getting to know us piece, because I think it depends. My answer to this really depends on how I first met you. If I'm first meeting you cold over the transom, as we call it, when a proposal just comes in to orbis@orbisbooks.com, then I'm 100% on board with everything Emily has said. And I would even add another word there of teachability. How easily can you communicate your ideas, but how easily can someone who is not as expert as you are communicate your ideas? If I've met you at a conference and if we've gotten to know each other before a formal proposal comes into the house, then you and I should have talked through some of these things before a proposal ever shows up. This level of your voice coming through, backing off, especially with Orbis, backing off some of the jargon in a proposal is really important because it shows the ability to communicate with folks who are not as expert as you, often students. And I think that especially if we've met and gotten to know each other before a formal proposal comes in, one of the big things that I look for is that you have a vision for how your project fits in our program and pulls us one little step closer to justice, right? One, like there was I forget who it was, someone on Twitter back in the days when it wasn't terrible, said that the PhD dissertation is like taking the world of knowledge and adding one little bump, and then the world catches up to, so like you expand the circumference of knowledge, like one little bump with your dissertation. And I think of that similarly with proposals. Like if you understand the house well enough that you can see how your writing's a genuine contribution to that also participates in what the house has been doing, and is not just like, hey, I'm over here and you need to catch up, but is actually like trying to emerge and move with the house. And that probably is more of a perspective outside of university press life, because at least a lot of the stuff I read from university presses, like y'all's, everything is pushing us in really great directions. And we, in addition to those novels, and we got a proposal months ago from someone who claimed to be writing on behalf of Jesus Christ. So that got sent around the house, but not in any kind of interest way. Um, uh, we normally look for how you kind of fit within and expand us, more than necessarily being entirely avant-garde.
I think that's something that surprised me about the process when I was lucky enough to start meeting some of you at different conferences, was that it is relational, that it can be, and it happily often is. I think, again, it's one of those walls of the academy that feels very solid before you go up and poke it. And it's like, oh no, that was just a facade. And I think it's it's heartening to know that there are people like you, I'm sure, in almost every house that are happily willing slash it's part of their job to meet with you, to chat with you, and to help you decide about best fit. Because the fit question, I think, as you all have mentioned, is one of the most important, because then there is co-alignment of mission. It's kind of like when you apply for any job, that lie you tell about how your personal mission fits theirs. In my opinion, shouldn't be one when you're going to write a whole dang book with someone, right? Like, how do you actually fit together as not just organizations or ways of thinking, but also as people? Emily brought that up too. Making sure that you're going to enjoy working with, or how the method sometimes is more important than the human, how that house approaches working with its authors, and how they have, what type of culture do they have with their authors. With that in mind, I've mentioned this before, we're an incredibly diverse community. People are going to write about what they're going to write about. Like, you're like, I am so deep in, like, the 17th century, like, Hindu guru of one part of India. That's what I write on, so sometimes you're just going to write about what you're going to write about. But are there topic areas or areas of interest that you see as growth areas for your press at the moment? Because there's a way of looking back on what you guys have prioritized. But since I have you in the Zoom room, is there a peek behind the curtain about how you guys are thinking about your forward momentum? Because we can read the tea leaves a little bit, but if there are conversations that you all are in about, we are super interested in XYZ, we have a depth in X, and so we're just going to keep driving the bus down that road. I think that might be helpful for our audience to know, not just like what's sexy, what do you think is going to sell, but what are some of the topic areas that your organization or your job in your position, you're seeing it as an opportunity or as a growth area.
Before I answer this question, I want to offer a caveat that I've learned while here, and that's that sometimes your book can be so up to date that you outdate yourself the moment it's published. This is not necessarily something that constructive or philosophical theologians need to worry about. We often sit in a little corner and read a bunch and then go write. But practical theologians, folks who do a lot of ethnography or religion and social science work, be careful that you don't try to be so up to the minute with your manuscript that the moment your manuscript comes out, it feels old and stuffy and stuck in the minute you submitted it. At least with Orbis, keep in mind that it could be 9 to 18 months between when you finish a manuscript and when the book's actually published. And so if your entire argument hinges on one event in 2024, that event could be actually meaningless by the time the book comes out. So that's my big caveat. That said, at least for us, I think a couple of the things that I'm paying attention to, obviously at Orbis, we continue to pay attention to and platform and prioritize voices of scholars who both platform and do work on behalf of and with and as the poor. The commitment to Latin American liberation theology that we've had for almost the entirety of our 50-year existence really still drives a lot of our programming decisions. Black theology, womanist theology. I'm really excited about a book that just came out 2 weeks ago that really is kind of the next wave of womanist ethics. That family of theological and ethical discourse is continuing here at the house, and I'm excited about the future of that. In Catholic social ethics, obviously Francis has been the Pope for a while now, and so we're not really riding the Francis wave the way we were a decade ago. And we're beginning to ask some other questions with, what are the implications of Laudato Si? How do we actually live life together as siblings? All what does it mean to be a community of missionary disciples? And some of these end up with really hopeful ecclesiological kind of directions or ethical conversations. Some of them also, though, are really tough, and we have to deal with trauma. And so one of the angles that we're looking at and pursuing are questions of trauma theory and trauma and theology in both Catholicism and Protestant Christianity. But especially given our history as a Catholic house, in multiple spaces of Catholic life and experience, and trauma there. So those are a couple of our areas right now.
I'll talk. Unless John wants to, that's fine. We'll let you save the best for last. We'll let John go last. Um, I would say obviously the University of Notre Dame Press, we have always had very deep roots in Catholic theology, Catholic history, systematic theology, and philosophy. None of that is ever going anywhere. We're really proud of that. We're proud of our history there, and we want to continue to move that legacy forward in really meaningful ways. I would also say, though, that looking to the future, it's really important to me as I continue to shape the future of these lists to have a very capacious understanding of what it can mean to work within and to study theology. And so I want to have bring in creative and exciting and innovative books that might not fit within those, or actually don't fit within those traditional molds. We also have a budding list in world religions. It's small but mighty and it's growing, and I'd like to continue to see that grow. I'm also really interested in projects that align beautifully with other lists that we have. For example, we have a really strong political theory and political science list, so I would like to see more political theology or books that line up with that side of our list. We have a really strong American history list, and I would like to do more to help those lists um, mold together beautifully and have more things that could sit on both sides, the history editor's list and sit on my list. But I will also say that I've always found that the best books and the best fit for a list is a smart person writing a book about what they are most passionate about. So that's always at the end of the day what I'm most interested in. Like, sure, I've got these subject areas I want to fill spots in. I've got things I know I want to do. But if you're a smart person and you're passionate about your idea, I want to talk to you and I want to know what it is, and I probably want to publish it. So I wouldn't obviously like think be somewhat intelligent in how you're thinking about fit. We all can see like this is what definitely like if a press definitely does or does not publish in a subject area. But I wouldn't hold yourself back because I and I bet other editors too save spots for the really smart person who comes out of left field with an amazing idea we would have thought of on our own. Because my job is not to be the expert, my job is to publish the experts. So I want to hear from them instead of having pre-made boxes that I'm going to slot people into, if that makes sense.
Yeah, at Fordham, it's interesting because we've always been a very interdisciplinary press, and so one of the things that kind of wasn't maybe on par or had just kind of like not really been developed was our rich sort of Catholic theological heritage with that interdisciplinarity. So that's really what what I think we try to look for and try to publish with Fordham are those kinds of books that bring together Catholic theology with gender and sexuality studies, right, or with eco theology or with critical race studies and that kind of stuff, right. But even beyond that, because of I think of our interdisciplinary kind of focus and just sort of the more I mean, a lot of our authors are reflecting on the contemporary ideas. So I want to sort of echo what Tom said about like, don't make your book so contextually sort of distinctive, right? Or dependent that like it becomes out of date. But at the same time, right, like that's what we're, publishing about in a lot of ways. So it is kind of a balance in trying to find that, but, or trying to find, it is kind of difficult to try and find that balance. But it's also exciting to sort of also publish things, right, that can speak to the current moment in a lot of ways, right, or that can help understand or discern the certain moment in whatever way that you sort of think needs to sort of happen there. But yeah.
The Vatican II phrase,
Great.
the signs of the
Super
times.
helpful. Let's get, oh, sorry.
I was just saying the Vatican II phrase, the signs of the times, is a really important one for us as a house. and I think it's part of our job as authors and editors, whether you're writing about Catholic theology or not, or writing as a Catholic or not, um, discerning the signs of the times in your own work and how you line up and speak to that is I think really important. Just kind of on the whole.
Yeah, it's that balance, right? Did you want to add? Okay. I have a question from Joshua in the chat. Very practical for the end of the week. Do you have any tips? It can be, again, it can be overwhelming. So there will be tables at the publishing hall. Any tips for us? What do you think for SBLAAR?
If there is an editor or a publishing house you are interested in speaking with, you should, if you have not already, you should email that editor this week and ask them for a meeting time. Editors take a lot of meetings at these conferences, so if you show up at the booth unexpectedly, they may or may not be there, and they may or may not have to say hello and run away for you, or may or may not have to hand you a business card and never see you again that meeting. So I would a million times rather someone email me today, tomorrow, next couple of days and say, hey, I have a book I want to talk to you about. Do you have a meeting spot? When would that be? And let's find a time when we know we can both be at the same place at the same time so that you don't get lost in the shuffle or lost in the chaos.
Yeah, I would echo that completely. And I also would say that if you do show up and we've not set up a time, do try to take a card and reach out. Don't reach out in the week and a half after AAR. I'm not gonna see it. And in that time frame, it's gonna get buried under all of the emails. So reach out then if we don't get a chance to meet, and if you need to take a card and go about your conference, then email me like midway into December, and just say, hey, I'm so sorry I missed you at AAR. I got your card, and I spoke to so and so who was selling books at your table. That can be a great way to then start that. And if I am at the booth, then maybe we can have like a 3 to 5 minute, just quick conversation too. But that week and a half after AAR is really chaotic. So all of those emails get lost.
Yeah, especially because there's Thanksgiving right afterwards, and it's nothing happens during that time. And um, but Joshua, you've already done yourself a good thing by being here, because you have 3 people you can come talk to at AAR at the end of this week, because we'd love to meet you and see what you thought about this panel, and also just to hear about your project. So come practice on us, and then go out into the rest of the exhibit hall, and after you've breathe a little bit, because it is overwhelming, right? See who else you might want to talk to, and I think that's a good start.
Awesome. Last question. What do you want us to know? What do you want our emerging scholar community to know, if you haven't said it already? What is your last word for today, at least on this Zoom? Not forever, for the love of God. But yeah, what would you want to leave us with today? Just your last little nugget of wisdom.
I think John should go first this time.
I think so. I kind of envision my job as being a conduit, more than anything, because I got into this and I got a PhD because I loved having these conversations. I loved reading smart people and having conversations with smart people, and all of that. And being an editor for me is just a way to do that and get paid, and be sort of in the know, right? So I think that's the biggest thing. Like, assume that we're here to help you. Assume that we want to help you, and assume that whether or not that's with us or with another press, we're going to do what we can to help you publish your book. because at the end of the day, we are most interested in getting this knowledge out there, and advancing the discourse and expanding that world, like Tom said, a little bit more.
Uh, I want to develop a lot of how Emily has talked about expertise. I think one of the things I really want you to know is that you know what you're talking about when it comes to your content. And a lot of us know what we're talking about, both when it comes to the publishing industry, but also in our own fields. And we can be theological nerds with you and with the best of them. And that also means, though, that I trust you to do the work, and that there's a trusting relationship that is kind of my bedrock, for how I go into working with an author. And it's a good collaborative, productive process, when we actually trust each other as colleagues, regardless of how high up you are in the academic ranks, and regardless of how high up I ever get in the publishing ranks. Like, if we can go into this as colleagues, who trust each other to know our stuff and to do right by each other, it can be a really healthy relationship.
This is somewhat similar to what John and Tom have already said, but I will just say that when someone is writing a book and an editor chooses to publish it or have it published at their publishing house, it's not just an investment in the physical book, but it's an investment in the idea, saying that the idea matters, and it's an investment in the person I'm writing the book, saying that you want to platform their voice, that you want to help them have an audience, that you want to be the book that helps them get tenure and have your job for the rest of your career, things like that. So when you are working with an editor or a publishing house, that editor's primary job is to be an advocate for you as a person with ideas, you as a scholar, and you as a person writing a book. They're an advocate for you, and then they're an advocate for your book. And if you do not have that sense of advocacy with an editor, or you don't feel like that person is viewing themselves as an advocate for you, or that you could trust them to be your advocate, then that's maybe a sign that's not the publishing house for you. But ultimately, an editor's job is to be an advocate, and any good editor knows that. They're an advocate for you, for your career, for your books, for your ideas. And that's what matters.
That's amazing. Thank you guys so much. I think that's my takeaway from today, is that as much as they might like to tell us otherwise, it takes a village, and it's a community. So thank you guys so much for your time today. And a lot of us will see each other very, very soon. Adios.